Hey everybody, good evening. It's about 7:01 here in Maryland. It's raining outside. I was hoping to get to the Peabody Heights Brewery, but perhaps next month. Um, Couple quick announcements is since it's June, we'd like we will have our newsletter coming out in July. So if you have any ideas or articles or anything, please submit before the end of the month. Anybody who is wanting to go to Minnesota to the national convention, um, obviously you can sign up all the way through, but the prices go up after the 7th. So their early bird discount, I think, is good through Friday. So, and other than that, the Orioles are in Toronto. Um, the London series is going on this weekend, I believe. So, um, I will admit people as they show up. I believe tonight we have Justin from who's here from Canada, who's going to talk to us about some of his current research. He's talked to us in the past on the Union League, I don't know, a year or two ago. Um, and then he can give us just some updates on what he's been doing. And we can take some questions and stuff as after his presentation is over. Justin, I made you a co-host. If you have any slides or anything to share, be my guest.
Okay,
So,
sounds good. Yeah, I do have some slides. Can you all hear me okay?
yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes.
awesome. So, should I get started or?
Go right ahead.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you for having me. It's good to be here. So I'll just take a second to get set up here. So if you just give me, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. I got a pop-up that said that.
Hang on, hang on.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Oh yeah, there it goes. Okay, so just give me a sec here. Slideshow. So yeah, this is just stuff I've been working on that's near and dear to my heart and a big part of why I'm in SABR, and has been very fruitful and frustrating research, but fun nonetheless, and met a lot of great people along the way. So yeah, this is going to be about 35 mystery men tracking down the most obscure players of the 19th century. There will be some Baltimore connections, I promise. So I'll just get started here. So yeah, the genesis of this research is there's 35 players from the years of 1872 in the National Association to 1902 in the American League, with no known first name as per Baseball Reference, or more importantly, the SABR Biographical Research Committee, which I'm an active member of, and sort of they really are the go-to place for kind of finalizing and confirming accurate research for all the player data and information you see online, especially for historical purposes. So as a breakdown by league, these missing players, essentially in National Association, there's 17 players. We don't know the first names. National League, only one. American Association, there's 7. Union Association, which is my bread and butter, there's 8. Players League, there's 1 player. And then the American League, there's 1 player. And the failure to uncover the true identity of these players is the result of a number of factors, ranging from how baseball was covered in the 19th century, as well as issues with online access and misinformation. So it stretches well over 100 years. And the general rule of thumb is if a guy remains unfound for 140 years, there's probably a good reason why. So, but with that, so this is an example of a player who is on Baseball Reference, played 1 game for Washington in 1872 in the National Association. He's actually the earliest missing player, so to speak, where we don't have any details. And yeah, he played 1 game on June 3rd, 1872, and he remains completely unknown to this day. But that's how these pages will look on Baseball Reference. So with that, I can touch a bit on the history of baseball biographical research and the encyclopedia in baseball. So from the 19th century, you have the annual publication of the Spalding and Reach Guides. And if you've looked through your Clipper archives or Sporting Life or Sporting News, you'll also find detailed biographies of players that list, where they're from, their playing career, date of birth, all that sort of stuff. but there's no concentrated effort to compile this information. This first happens in 1910 when the Washington Herald starts publishing a series called Who's Who in Baseball. It's the first attempt to document every MLB player of all time, but it also includes minor league players and executives. And it was a weekly series that ran for, I think, well over a year, trying to document as many people as possible. And this builds into 1912, the first edition of Who's Who in Baseball, which became kind of an iconic uh, publication for many decades. I think it only recently stopped publishing, but it was first published by Baseball Magazine. It doesn't have any relation to this Washington Herald series, but it's same idea, trying to put all these names and places and people together in one place for erstwhile baseball fans. And so in 1922, you have what is essentially the first baseball encyclopedia. It's called the Baseball Cyclopedia by Ernest Lanigan, who's a well-known sports writer, and it's credited with inventing numerous statistics, including the RBI. And yeah, it's the first baseball encyclopedia. And then the next sort of big shift is in 1951 with the Baseball Encyclopedia by Turkin and Thompson, which includes the birth and death dates of as many players as possible. There's lots of guesswork, though, in this research, which is understandable given it's 1951, and you're trying to piece together the careers of players who may have not played since the 1880s or so. Unfortunately, as a result, many of the errors that occurred in this first edition still permeate through research today. So you can look at a player file in the baseball reference, and you'll have some of the information that first appeared in 1951, but we don't know the source. We don't know why it's there. We don't have any proof that it's accurate. It's just a lot of guesswork. And multiple new editions of this encyclopedia kept being published. They would correct information, they'd remove information. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. And so it's a messy process. Here's a clip of the first edition of the Who's Who in Baseball from 1910 in the Washington Herald. You'll see it just lists a bunch of players along with their bios. Sometimes it lists just like the places they played. Sometimes it's got their like height and weight. Sometimes it's got their batting average. It's very haphazard, but it's the first attempt to try and do this. And this is what the first edition of Who's Who in Baseball by Baseball Magazine looks like. Use a bit more systematic with player names, place of birth, and the like, and as well as playing records. So yeah, essentially you start seeing, look more familiar of what an encyclopedia, a baseball encyclopedia looks like. And so this continues on. 1969, obviously the Baseball Encyclopedia by Macmillan, the Mac, as we all know. It attempts to improve and standardize stats and play records, and also codifies what is a major league. So it defines what major league statistics are and who is a major leaguer. And that's really important at this point. And in 1971, the SABR Biographical Research Committee is formed. And this becomes sort of the first kind of organized effort to unite people in this strange pursuit of trying to track down these obscure players, find out where they ended up, where they passed away, what their lives were like. And it's building off the efforts of a lot of people who were involved, such as like Lee Allen and Tom Shea and Bill Haber, who were active and avid researchers and really did a lot to expand our knowledge of who played baseball and who played in the major leagues. And then 89, we have Total Baseball, which is another leap forward. Again, just an essential research at the time, and just keeps building on the encyclopedia. And then in 2000, obviously Baseball Reference is launched. And I think that supplants like the Baseball Encyclopedia as we know it. So typically, if I want to know anything, I go to Baseball Reference as my first stop. It's I think incredible resource, great people work there, great people working on it, incredible amounts of information, and quite easy to use, I find. So it's essentially what the Baseball Encyclopedia is nowadays in 2024. And then another significant step here is in 2020, several Negro Leagues were granted Major League status, and this coincides with the addition of Negro League stats to Baseball Reference. And then in 2024, just a few days ago, last week, Negro League statistics officially were incorporated into the Major League Baseball record book, as well as the 1949 and 50 seasons and 49 other Negro League independent teams. Independent Negro teams were recommended for Major League status. So again, the list of people who played in the majors now is growing exponentially just by the addition of these records. So I think there's an influx of some 3,000 players as well as the 2020 edition. I don't know what the numbers will be for this 2024 update, but it'll probably be another few hundred at least. So yeah, you see it just keeps growing. So that brings me to the next, so here's a photo of Baseball Encyclopedia, the Mac, Took and Thompson, and then the Total Baseball. So, just see how it's progressed over the years. So the question you might be asking is, why are players missing? Well, there's a variety of factors, and I'll get through all those factors now. So the first, one of the more common reasons why a player might be missing is they used an alias. This is a fairly common practice in the 19th century and early 20th century. There's a variety of reasons why someone might use an alias. Sometimes people would use it because they jumped their contract. Sometimes you'd use it to preserve amateur status. This was the case of Eddie Collins, the Hall of Fame second baseman who was a college player who debuted under the name Eddie Sullivan when he first played for the Philadelphia Athletics before he's quickly discovered to be Eddie Collins. Sometimes it'd be family reasons. In the 19th century in particular, there was a big stigma by many families against playing baseball. It was thought to be uncouth, not a true profession, true vocation. And so players might be willing to use aliases to kind of hide from their parents. And then there's also legal reasons. 19th century baseball is filled with some characters of ill repute, and in many cases players use aliases. Maybe they're trying to hide from the police, things like that. So as far as it goes for the missing players, there's a few examples. So like Spencer, I mentioned 1872, he played one game in the record, in the newspaper coverage at the time. His name is listed in quotes, and so that's typically how it indicates it's an alias. Jones, 1885, he played one game for the New York Metropolitans, the American Association. There's a note saying he's using an alias and he's planning to sign with the team tomorrow, but the next day he's not in the lineup, and we don't know who he is. The case of Macy, who was a one-game catcher for Columbus in 1890, is interesting because it may actually be a typo, but it's not totally clear. There's a catcher who was an amateur catcher at the time who has a similar name, but we don't know if it's him. And then mystifyingly, Hillebrand is the most recent player in the non-Negro leagues who only has last name. And there's multiple notes saying he was a college player using an alias, but no one's ever figured out who it was. He played one game for the Chicago Cubs in 1902, and just lost to history, even though people have been trying to find him for well over a century now. So another key factor was team instability. If you ever look at the baseball record book, 19th century baseball was incredibly volatile. Teams went under with incredible regularity. It was very common for teams to release their best players to save money and then replace them on short notice with players of varying quality. So that includes people who just sandlotters and the like. And this resulted in a number of other missing players taking the field. So notably the 1875 Brooklyn Atlantics are one of the worst teams of all time. I believe we went 2-42, and by August and September, they're just grabbing anyone off the Brooklyn sandlots. And there's, I think, 7 or 8 players from that team who we don't have first names for. The Washington Nationals in the Union Association, 1884, they were incredibly volatile to start the season. They sort of stabilized, but again, they were looking to find whatever cheap talent they could, and they would discard it as soon as they got it if it proved not to be fruitful. And then, interestingly, the 1890 Philadelphia Athletics of the American Association, they actually were in first place in the league as late as July. They were a pennant contender, but by mid-September, they had lost money. And so as a result, they basically released all of their players.
Can I call you right back? Thank you. I have a meeting. Bye-bye.
So the Athletics, they released all the players in September and then filled them with sandlotters. This motley crew went on this terrible road trip, lost their final 21 games. And in the last game of the season, they actually fielded a lineup with 4 of the 9 players we don't know the first name, including an outfield known as Swigert, Stafford, and McBride. And know absolutely nothing about them. So here's a photo of the 1884 Washington Nationals during one of the most stable periods in August. But just you get the sense, like there's a lot there. So another issue when doing this research is many of the missing players have very common last names. So notably names like Smith, Jones, Lewis, some of those common names in the English language. It makes it difficult to track down some of these guys. One of my favorite examples is a player named Murphy, who played one game for the 1884 Boston Unions. He was basically enlisted when the starting catcher didn't show up for the game because he's probably drunk. The backup catcher got injured in the first inning, so they brought in a fan to catch. And then within 5 minutes, he's allowed a couple errors and a few pass balls, and they exile him to left field. But his name's Murphy, and he's in Boston. And so trying to find a Murphy in Boston is like finding a needle in a haystack. I checked the 1884 Boston City directory. There's nearly 1,000 Murphys listed. And so he remains lost to history. Another notable one is a pitcher named Smith in 1884. He played for the Baltimore Unions. Again, Smith is a very common name. I believe I may have identified him, but a lack of smoking gun. And they also had another pitcher on the team called Ed Smith. So it just creates a lot of confusion. I expect there's a lot more cases like that where records get conflated because of the same last name. Another troubling and frustrating occurrence, if you've ever done modern research on historical stuff using newspapers.com and things like that, it's very common for baseball coverage to only use last names when they're referring to players, and particularly newcomers. So often new players would not really get anything written about them for a period of time until they prove their, I guess, standing with the club. And another issue is that coverage of clubs would typically wane as season went along, especially if the team wasn't good. By July, August, they start getting like a lot of papers would stop publishing box scores of the team. They might just publish the final score, not provide full game accounts, things like that. And then the quality and depth of coverage varied wildly by city as well. Like certain cities like Philadelphia had great newspaper coverage, Cincinnati had great coverage, and other cities like Baltimore, unfortunately, the Baltimore baseball coverage is often kind of lacking. And so you end up with cases like another Baltimorean who I wrote about for the Baltimore Chop last year, I think. He was an outfielder named Scott. He played 13 games. The Baltimore Unions won all 13 games. And then he disappeared without a trace, and no one knows anything about him. There's zero biographical mentions of him in the Baltimore papers anywhere. He hit a home run in one game. He had a game-winning hit in the 13th inning in another game. He, had a little bit of ability and just totally vanishes, and there's just nothing on him. I've never been able to find a reasonable candidate for him. And then so a fellow named Jones, who played 4 games for the Washington American Association Club that was in its final couple weeks of existence. And he joined the team on the road in Toledo and in Pittsburgh. And again, the Washington papers weren't covering anything. The Toledo and Pittsburgh papers had no reason to comment on the appearance of some mystery outfielder. And we just, again, don't know who this guy is, and add in the common name, and you're just left with a mystery. And another thing that happens as a result of newspaper coverage and conventions and just technology is that box scores are often filled with typos and bizarre contractions. And this is sort of the result of the challenge of the printing press. We had limited characters to use, and you had limited space. And then also the transcription issues, because I believe a lot of for each game, say the umpire or whoever the scorekeeper is, they would have a written list of the roster, list of basically who's playing, and then whoever types that up might misspell something, or someone has bad handwriting and you can't read it. And this also is a result of there's no formalization of spelling for a lot of names, especially at that time. And so one example is this player named Schaefer, who played 1 game for Brooklyn in 1875, and his name appears in various papers as Schaefer with a C, Schaefer with 1 F, Schaefer with 2 Fs, Shear and Shear. And so he's just, it's tough to find anything on him. A couple other examples. McGreemer played for the Nationals. Again, likely a typo of another player that's already on the team, but don't know for sure. McDoolin, who pitched 1 disastrous game for the Baltimore Marylands in 1873. He's actually likely a player named Morris McDonald, but again, haven't been able to find what happened to that guy either. And then there's another guy called Gavin, who's actually a player named Tom McGovern, most likely, but again, lacking the detail to kind of finish the case. An example, here's a faded box score from the Boston Globe of McGreever's singular appearance in the majors. At the time, they had a player named Ed McKenna, who his last name appears variously as McKee, McKenna, McKinney, McKinney, along with McKenna. So I believe that McGreever might actually be that player, but don't know for sure. So again, I wish I could travel back in time and ask the scorekeeper what this guy's name was. And then another cause of why these players remain anonymous for some 100+ years is quite a few of them weren't very good, and oftentimes actively terrible. So famous in my world is a pitcher named Lewis, who pitched 3 innings for the Buffalo Players League Club, which is a disastrous team on the road in Brooklyn. He likely was a local player from Brooklyn, but he allowed 13 hits, 20 earned runs, and the paper just said his name was Mud. Here's a copy of the game account, 28-16 victory for Brooklyn. And yeah, Lewis, after the game, it was Mud. Yeah. So again, nothing's mentioned before or after of how he joined the club, why he was given an opportunity. And yeah, he just kind of fades into obscurity. And it's likely that if you did that poorly in a baseball game and were in the newspapers, you might not want to tell anyone that it was you. So. And then this is a more modern concern in this kind of research is the availability of newspapers. So we as modern researchers have access to near infinite information, but there's still gaps, like the number of key papers online, or even if they're online, they might not be searchable, or the tool or the website you use to access it might be really hard to use and frustrating and not do what you want it to. And so, for example, the 1875 New Haven Club in the National Association has, I think, 2 or 3 players who know first names, but the complete run of that 1875 New Haven papers aren't online. The Newark, New Jersey newspapers are not easily searchable, and there's quite a few players who fit the bill for this. Newark was kind of a hotspot for baseball at that time, but yeah, 19th century Newark papers aren't searchable online really. And then there's a bunch of key Baltimore papers like the Baltimore Sunday Herald and the Baltimore American, which are either not online or they're not searchable. And again, I think there's some things we might be able to find if these were available readily. And then finally, the Philadelphia City Item has incredible amateur coverage of baseball in the 1880s and 1890s, but it's not online. I have PDFs courtesy of Richard Hirschberger, but trying to look through those, it's wonderful and frustrating at the same time because there's just so much stuff to look through and it's not searchable. So just have to, strain your eyes and spend a couple hours trying to dig through stuff and try and find some obscure name in some list of amateur teams and hope it's the guy and hope it's a clue and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, so availability is an issue in the 21st century. And then another thing that's caused issues is like bad information spreads like a virus. So like I mentioned before, the Tolkien and Thompson Encyclopedia has a number of typos, incorrect information, and it keeps reiterating as you publish a new encyclopedia. And then eventually Baseball Reference launched. It's using the encyclopedia as its reference point, and some of those mistakes carry on online. And then additionally, when people do research, sometimes they aren't as thorough as they ought to be, or they don't know what they're looking for, or they might not quite understand the situation. And so they might submit some bad information to Baseball Reference, have the citation or whatever, but it's not correct. And then that information ends up living online. And then when other sites copy that information, it spreads. And so it's very difficult sometimes when you have mistakes to fix them. Crowdsourcing is incredible because you can have so many people looking up stuff, working on things, but it has issues because of that. You might have overlap of content, you might have mistakes, all sorts of things. So fortunately, as a member of the biographical research committee, like we have a relationship with Baseball Reference, and they're quite good about helping about updating information that we give them and things like that. So I mean, it's a work in progress, but yeah, like it's just a thing that happens. I think this happens with any sort of online work, as stuff can spread so quickly. And then another thing that probably makes the 35 missing players even more is there's another 25 or so cases that are ambiguous. There's players who have been misidentified or the records conflated. One example I'll give is a player named Piggy Ward, who's an infielder in the 1880s, 1890s. He's credited as being the youngest player, I think, in Philadelphia Phillies history, with one appearance in 1883, but it's almost certainly not him because he was a guy from Altoona and would not have probably been in Philadelphia to play the game at 16. And there's a chance he might actually have played a game in Altoona in 1884 and not credited with it. But that information's been on the record books for 70 years and haven't been able to undo it because we haven't figured out who played the 1883 game. And so, yeah, it's just there's a lot of misidentification, conflation of records, especially when you're dealing with these common names and things like that. And then the other issue is there's placeholder names. So a number of players have essentially placeholder names. Like we don't know why that first name is listed. There's at least 20 players I've identified that have that as kind of the situation. There's a couple of pictures for the Chicago White Stockings in 1893, Abe Johnson and Gus Yost, and the source of those first names is unknown. And so in theory, they should belong to the Missing Players Club, but instead they just have these fanciful names and we don't know where they came from. And one of the issues is that when you have this name, say Abe Johnson or Gus Yost, we don't know the source of where that first name came from. So I'm hesitant to remove it unless we have absolute proof that it's not the first name. And the only way to prove it's not the first name is if you find the actual first name. And so it creates some issues with just how stuff's represented. And one other thing, if you've ever done any sort of 19th century research, genealogy, all that sort of stuff, is the 1890 census and the fact that it's missing. It was almost all entirely destroyed in 1921. And then in 1932, the remaining documents that survived were destroyed along as per federal record keeping procedures. And since the majority of these players who are missing played prior to 1890, it seems like the census would be a real great help to solve a chunk of those cases. And it also spreads into the rest of my baseball research, which is not just spent on these guys, but also guys who we don't know death dates and things like that. And so, yeah, I think having that census would have been huge for solving a lot of these cases, but unfortunately it's lost. And so can't really use it as a tool. So you have this big gap from 1880 to 1900 where it's hard to track certain people down. And there's just a woodcut of a woman compiling the census circa 1890. So with that, it's not necessarily it's a frustrating experience to do this kind of research and often meet with multiple dead ends and frustration. But nonetheless, when you have successes or make headway on a case, it's a very satisfying experience. It's honestly, I've had moments of just almost breaking down and crying when I found some information that just was like, oh, it feels so good, you know? And so that's what keeps me going with all this sort of stuff. So of the 35 players I've identified as not having first names in the record book, there's about 6 of them who have strong candidates, and we just need like that extra little bit of information, maybe that would put it over the edge, and you never know where it will come from. In the past year, we've identified 2 players who were previously on the list, John Sterling, who pitched 1 game for 1890 in the Philadelphia Athletics, and George Pierce, who is a Baltimore player who played a couple games for the Washington Nationals. So we've, made the list a little bit smaller. So it's quite a good feeling. And new papers and resources are going to continue coming online, most likely, and that will hopefully help us unlock various mysteries. There's also that if other people have a look at this and get involved with this kind of research, you never know what people will find. And so, as an example, like one of the neat resources that came along is the Camden, New Jersey papers. Camden is basically right by Philadelphia and has a ton of baseball going on in the 1880s, 1890s. A lot of Philadelphia guys would play there and go back and forth between Camden and Philadelphia. And having those records online is really great because we've found a few players that way. And then additionally, like Bill Curl and Peter Morris, if you know them, are absolutely incredible researchers and really great people. And I feel very privileged and blessed to have worked with them, that they respond to my emails, things like that. So when you have good people doing good stuff, I mean, good things can happen. And the Biographical Research Committee newsletter, I'd encourage you all to sign up for the committee. It provides regular updates, plus there's Mystery of the Month and Find of the Month. And then this is a great book written by Peter Morris that details this kind of research and sort of the legwork that goes into finding some of these guys. It's a wonderful book that just reads like a detective novel, just how he writes. He's a wonderful writer, and the stories he tells about some of the players and tracking them down is very fascinating. So highest recommendation for that book. And here's John Sterling we found, and then George Pierce is the other guy we found recently, who again didn't have the first name. And that brings us to 2020 and the league leagues being officially given major league status in the record book. New leagues and major leagues. So we see the recognition of 7 Negro Leagues as major leagues from 1920 to 1948. By my count, there's 482 Negro League players now in the record books who don't have a first name. So this is a massive blow, so to speak, to this hope progress that we can find these 35 missing guys. Now it's 482 guys to look for. But it's also a wonderful opportunity to do historical research, correct the record, give shine some light on these guys and tell their stories. And so I'm hoping to get more involved with doing that research, but hopefully other folks also are inspired to do so. And I promised some Baltimore connections, so here's a list of the missing Baltimore players. So yeah, we've got a couple from the National Association, a couple from the Union Association, and then I think it's about 10 from the Negro Leagues. And again, if you ever want to do something fun, you just start looking up these last names in newspapers.com in the respective cities, try and find box scores where they appeared, and then you kind of off to the races, and hopefully you find some leads. And I'm sure some of these guys are findable. It's just a matter of having the right train of thought at the right time and just finding that bit of information. So yeah, that sort of concludes everything. I presented on Baseball Union Association to your chapter, I think last year sometime. But yeah, I have this book on the Union Association that came out a couple years ago, still available. Happy to talk about it anytime, any place. But yeah, that sort of wraps up presentation. Happy to take any questions or comments or anything like that. So I'll just stop sharing my screen here. And thank you once again.
All right. Justin, you plan on publishing on these folks as they get this discovered? Or is this just something for the committee to kind of...
Yeah, it depends. So I've written a few bios on some players that I've discovered, either just like, yeah, so that's like SABR biographical committee is one thing. I have like a large scale idea that would be kind of maybe unwieldy for a book, but to almost do a biography of biographers and like, just capture this history of biographical research in the baseball world and kind of like tell those kind of stories. But I'm not sure how to get the ball rolling on that. It's just ideas in my head. But yeah. So typically, if I get enough on someone, I'll turn it into a SABR bio. So that's usually what I've done.
With regard to the folks in the Negro Leagues, and 480 is a lot, obviously.
Oh yeah.
Bernard McKenna and David Stinson have done extensive Negro League stuff, especially in the Baltimore Black Sox, I want to say, more than the Elites. So you might want to reach out to them. And if you don't have their contact info, just email me and I can pass it on if you want to look up.
Yeah. I've interacted with, I've met David. He's a great guy. And so, yeah, I might touch base with him about that. Yeah. I hadn't realized he had done stuff on the Negro Leagues. I know he'd done a lot of stuff in the 19th century. So, yeah, that's great. So.
Yeah, there's always people, in SABRs, there's always somebody who has a like mind, and it's just about, finding the right person, and no matter how obscure your ideas are, I'm sure you'll find somebody,
Yeah, that's great.
Anybody else? Questions, comments? Justin, are you going to Minneapolis?
No, unfortunately, yeah, I didn't. I went to the Fred in Cooperstown in April, so that was kind of my conference budget for the year.
I hear you.
Yeah. I was in Baltimore for 2022, and I'd love to go again to a SABR conference, but yeah, so I have to pick and choose. So.
Rumor has it, and don't quote me on this by anything, that it might be Dallas next year. Oh,
really? Okay, yeah, all right. I've never been to Texas, so that'd be a reason to go.
Yeah, I think originally they might have to do it this year, but they're defending World Series champs and they have the All-Star game, so it's kind of busy.
Yeah, but understandable. Yeah.
Hey, Justin, I've got a couple quick little questions. Hopefully,
sure.
You said in the beginning that it was a strange pursuit, so I was just wondering how you got involved in this.
Yeah, sure.
And then you also mentioned that you found Smith recently. Yeah. And I was wondering how that happened. How'd you find?
Sure. The Smith ID is like still not confirmed, but I have reasonably strong convictions on that. So yeah, I'll start with that first, I guess. Well, no, I'll start with the first question first. Yeah, I got involved with SABR, like really involved, like about 8 years ago now. I wanted to write a biography of a player named Bob Mckinney, who played 2 games for 1901 Philadelphia Athletics. He's not related to me, but just wanted to like figure stuff out about him and have something to do. And so with that, I wrote a SABR bio of him. I was able to find a photo of him, and then someone contacted me saying that the SABR Pictorial History Committee didn't have a photo of him, so provided that to them. And then through that, I started working on trying to find photos of players, and then built up all these case files, and then started to realize it overlapped a lot with a lot of players who are these missing players who we don't know anything about. And so that put me in touch with the biographical committee. And so from there, it's just kind of have spreadsheets of all these guys, and then just have email chains with a lot of people about a lot of different things. So just kind of gone full SABR, and then just kind of found this niche that a few people were working on intrepidly. And then, I'm a pretty determined researcher. I have a library and archives background. And so all this sort of stuff just ties together nicely. And it's a neat way to express, my interest in baseball. And then as for Smith, so the box score and accounts for the one guy's. So there's 2 players named Smith on the team in 1884. One's a guy called Ed Smith, who's from Canada, who I was able to finally track down. And there's a bunch of notes about him, and it says he gets released. But then about a week or 2 later, another player named Smith is pitching for the team. But it mentions he's specifically coming from the amateur club in Baltimore. And so he's playing 1 game. He's a local amateur player, whereas this other player had been imported from Canada to come play. And so that's a clue that it's 2 different people. And then from there, you start digging, trying to find any reference to the Smith guy or his team he was playing on. It said the team is called, I think, the Arctics. But then looking through the box scores in 1884 Baltimore papers, there's no team called the Arctics, but there's one, I think, had a different name, but it started with an A. And they had some players on it, like they had a catcher called Childs, who's the brother of Cupid Childs, who's a later major leaguer, and another player named Bosley. And then you find in 1885, there's a pitcher named Smith who's playing with Childs and Bosley, and Smith and Childs end up being a duo, like a minor league catching duo for a few years, like through going to Charleston and all sorts of stuff. And so that pitcher is a guy named Fred Smith, who played 1 season in the majors in 1890, won 19 games for Toledo. And so piecing it all together, like it's most likely that guy because of, this 1885 connection. And then, but it's just because the name Smith, and there's no thing saying like da 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 da. Or you look at a bio later and it doesn't mention this appearance in 1884, which is understandable because he might have just been on trial or whatever, versus like lots of stuff. So so that's the case files. You just try and find any clues you can, and then kind of like spread and just see what names you can find that connect and things like that.
So when you found the 2 recently, and 2 off the list, and then added 482, did you just put your head down on your desk and go, oh my God?
Yeah, well, it's just it's a process, right? And the Negro League stuff is tough just because the newspaper coverage of Negro League games is sporadic. It's tough finding consistent sources that reliably talk about things, and then just add in just the general historic racism that means record keeping, all sorts of things aren't kept as well, all sorts of stuff. And so it just makes it tough to know where to start. So I haven't spent as much time as I ought to. I typically, if I do start looking, I'll try and find someone with an unusual name that seems like might be findable. So I've been working on a case of a guy named Gumbs, like Gumbs, who caught a couple games for Newark in 1926 for Newark Eagles, I believe, and trying to find that guy in the newspapers because his name's unusual and he was a catcher, and so you just hope that maybe there'll be some clue and stuff like that. But I haven't made as much progress as I ought to. It's difficult to start totally from scratch, especially when I'm not as familiar with like the Negro newspapers and things like that. So it's like a learning curve to get involved with that sort of stuff. So.
Well, it's impressive. I enjoyed listening to you. Very impressive. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
Hey guys, anybody else got any questions for Justin, who's I think up in Calgary, right, my friend?
Yeah, up in Calgary, yeah. But
okay.
Lifelong O's fan nonetheless. So.
And we're playing. We're at Toronto today. I think
Yeah.
till tomorrow. So
Yeah, well, it's off to a good start. So.
oh yeah. For those of you who don't know, the All-Star ballots are now online, so you can go and start voting for your favorite players. So
Didn't
whether it's Orioles or whomever else.
Calgary, didn't you guys used to have a minor league team back in like the 90s, 2000s? I don't remember.
Calgary Cannons, yeah. So they were the farm team for the Seattle Mariners. So I remember seeing Alex Rodriguez play there as an 18-year-old when I was, when I was a teenager, and so it was cool. And yeah, had a lot of good players, and then they moved on to Pittsburgh, and then Florida, and then Chicago, and then there's only one affiliated minor league team in Canada now. It's in Vancouver, and the Blue Jays single A team, I think. So yeah, but yeah, he used to go to a lot of Cannons games. That's a big reason why I became a baseball fan. So
Because Edmonton had a team too, didn't they? They were like affiliate of the Angels at one time.
Yeah, Edmonton Trappers, they were the affiliate for the Angels, I believe. Yeah, I remember seeing Tim Salmon playing and things like that. So
I was curious to know what you do for a living.
Yeah, so I have a background in library archives, but I work for the federal government in Canada in web and communications stuff. So just a lot of just web publishing and things like that. So
Oh, okay, thanks.
All right, guys. Well, appreciate it as always. I know we're in June, so it's graduation season, and summer vacations and all that kind of stuff. I think we're about 60 games in or so, maybe more of the regular season. So getting close to the All-Star break. Obviously, I will keep you guys posted via email on our upcoming events. We are booked through July. We have some spotty ones in August and September. And then I'm going to send out probably the next week or so for anybody who has a book or research or something that wants to talk for any of the available slots for the rest of 2024. So we're a pretty popular chapter, and I really appreciate all of the folks who love to call in and do presentation on their current research or anything that they're any publication they have coming out. Like I said, the newsletter will be out sometime in July. So if you have anything to submit, get it in by June 30th. And I don't know if anybody on here is going, but we have a joint minor league game at the end of the month, actually on June 30th. At Reading. So it's the Bowie Bay Sox at the Reading Fightins. With the Philadelphia chapter. So I think about 35 or 40 of us are planning on that. So and the Orioles game, for those of you who live locally, will likely be the last home game of the year. It's a Sunday game against Detroit. And we're putting together the menu now for the combo ticket, which will be in the upper deck, and a lunch in the warehouse in the designated hitter lounge. And I believe it's also a giveaway day, so that'll be incentive for people to come out. So from my standpoint, I think that's about it. Justin, much appreciated. Thank you for joining us. I know a couple people on here from out of town as well. So always good to see, faces that I know and names I haven't seen in a while. So I will not be able to host the call on the 30th because I will be at the Reading game. So one of my other fellow board members will be doing it. And that is Steve Ditmore and his forthcoming book on the life of Jim Gilliam will be the topic. So that's June 30th at 7 p.m. I'll send a reminder out with the link, of course. So greatly appreciated, guys. Have a great week. Stay dry, stay cool. Enjoy your summer. And hopefully whoever your team that you're supporting, they're doing well. I've read an interesting fact, though. There's only 4 teams in the National League that are over 500. Philadelphia, LA, Braves, and I forget who the fourth one is, the Brewers, maybe. So I found that interesting that the majority of the league is pretty lousy. But Thanks again, and have a great week, guys, and reach out to me if you need anything. Take care.